a great honor for me to deliver these remarks. And thank you, Irma, for thinking that I could even be a keynote speaker or guest. But I will make a couple of points, try to be quick because I was told about the time I have. One, let us remember, ladies and gentlemen, that not all is well in Ethiopia today. When this conversation began some time ago, it wasn't as it is today in Ethiopia. Many Rwandans' hearts are always with their Ethiopian brothers and sisters. Let us also remember that unlike much of Africa, Ethiopia was not colonized and did not experience the near universal colonial policy of divide and rule. Colonial divide and rule was meant for the long haul because post-colonial trauma is still a challenge with many of the countries which were colonized. I reflected when I was growing up through school, Ethiopia was always every teacher's example for resistance to colonialism, resilience thereafter, and unity in diversity. I think every teacher in Africa would want to teach those things because they used to come at the very first, at the beginning of the lesson. Today, it also represents one of Africa's potential economic powerhouses. So our sincere wish for a quick return to peace to Ethiopia. But now I'm asked to focus on hate speech with a focus on my country, Rwanda, and the role the media played and so on. Rwanda has a colonial background. In 1946, the United Nations entrusted Rwanda to Belgium's safe custody, together with Burundi. Many times I never understand what that means, how you entrust another country to another country's safe custody. We were here before colonialism came. The trusteeship was terminated in 1962 when when Rwanda attained independence. By that time, the Belgian colonial administration had crafted and implemented a severe divide and rule policy, which Rwanda suffered from intensely. The nation of Rwanda, now this is about Rwanda. The nation of Rwanda is composed of Rwandans. They speak the same language. They occupy the same Rwanda. They live together, the same hills and in the same communities. They share history, they share clans, they share totems. None of all the characteristics that differentiate people is present in Rwanda. And I make this comment advisedly because I'm trying to talk about the differences where they are natural and where they are artificial. No Rwandans or particular groups of Rwandans live in a particular part of Rwanda because of their tribal or ethnic or any other difference. We all live where we live. We've done that for thousands and thousands of years. There were three traditional economic activities engaged in by Rwandans during colonial times: crop husbandry, animal husbandry, especially cattle, and pottery. The population was differentiated on the basis of these activities as Hutu, crop husbandry, Tutsi, cattle husbandry, and Twa in pottery. These activities have now expanded, have mixed up. Everybody is doing everything. Nobody is still defined by these traditional activities. Colonial administration, in an act of colonial bigotry, found these differentiations fertile ground to sow divide and rule. So the differentiations were defined as ethnic differences. Nothing was further from the truth, but it was made the single story that described Rwanda for nearly 4 decades, and then it started to be accepted. Rwandans who, before the advent of colonialism, knew themselves as Rwandans, as one undivided and indivisible people, were educated, Scientifically, they imported scientists, philanthropists, doctors, and so on, who would convince people that they are different from the others. Religiously, they also referred to the Bible to indicate how different we were, that we were different and had nothing in common. So the nation of Rwanda, the nation of Rwandans, was dehumanized, robbed of their dignity, made tribal. So Rwandan recognition of equal humanity ceased to exist. The nation was maligned, and that began our descent to the hell that was the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. A once united nation was dispossessed, split apart, and in many ways, before the 1994 genocide, Hutu killed Tutsi with ease. But those were pilot cases. In 1994, it was the real thing. 1 million Tutsi were killed in 100 days in broad daylight without any feeling of remorse, or that the victims were as human as their killers. And here comes hate speech. Hate speech was the multi-purpose vehicle that transported our country to the 1994 genocide. The artificial creation of 3 distinct ethnicities where there was none before, institutionalization of ethnicity, especially in the national political framework, discrimination against the Tutsi, were all made possible by hate speech. I have a few key chronological examples. I would have done a whole lot of a list, but I want you to listen to a few of these. After writing what he called a Hutu manifesto, Rwanda's first independence president, Gregory Kayibanda, described Hutu and Tutsi as 2 people with absolutely nothing in common, akin to 2 people from 2 planets. That was someone who had just become president, but before he became president, he also issued a document called the Hutu Manifesto. And by doing a Hutu Manifesto, he meant that the Hutu as a people are no longer part of the Rwandan people. They are now a Hutu as a people, and then there are Tutsi as a people and Twa as a people. Feudal era Rwanda was led by kings and chiefs who were Tutsi. Feudal rule was the case in very much of Africa and very much of Europe. But it's hate speech which turned it into Tutsi oppression and Tutsi domination. Because for you to have a justification for extermination, for discrimination, you had to have a victim of that. You have to set it up. So hate speech drove the feudal era kings and chiefs into Tutsi oppression and Tutsi domination. Mind you, not all feudal era chiefs, not all Tutsi were feudal era chiefs and kings. 99% of them were ordinary citizens existing side by side with everybody else in the country. But when hate speech turns this feudal category of our citizens into Tutsi oppressors and Tutsi dominators, then it was no longer necessary that you were a Tutsi down there in the countryside, taking care of your cattle, probably growing some crops. You were part of an oppressive and a dominant group. A political activist named Gitera in 1959 authored the now famous 10 Commandments of the Hutu, which we know in Rwanda as a major ignition of Hutu hatred against the Tutsi, included prohibitions from trusting Tutsi, treating Tutsi as friends, and the like, all the way until Commandment 10. There were prohibitions meant to stir up hatred between the Hutu and the Tutsi. The Speaker of Parliament at the time between 1960 and 65, spent longer than a month in Europe, traversing many countries, justifying the 1959 and 1960 killings and exodus of Rwandans of the Tutsi now created ethnicity by describing how bad, how evil, how criminal they were, and how justified it was to kill them or throw them out of the country. Fast forward, a gentleman called Ngeze Hassan is now a convict from the International Court in Tanzania, which tried people who committed genocide here. He's now a convict, this Hassan Ngeze gentleman. In 1990, authored another 10 commandments of the Hutu in his newspaper called Kangura. If you Google, you will always find this newspaper called Kangura, and it will tell you who Ngeze was and what it was itself. Key among the commandments included one prohibiting a Hutu person from sympathizing with or empathizing with a Tutsi, that to do so is to betray a Hutu cause. Another gentleman, Mugesera Leon, is now a convict serving time here in Rwanda. He was a university lecturer in 1992, reignited the theory that the Tutsi belonged to Abyssinia. Abyssinia should be part of Ethiopia and should be sent back through the Nyabarongo River. Now, we have a river here called Nyabarongo, and this river is a tributary to the Kagera, and the Kagera is a tributary to the Nile. So this gentleman went somewhere deep in Western Rwanda, where he's born, and did a huge public rally, and mentioned a number of things, including that the Tutsi belong to Abyssinia, and they should be sent back to Abyssinia through the Nyabarongo River. After that, hundreds of Tutsi, hardly 2 weeks, were killed and thrown actually in the Nyabarongo River. Mugesera regretted publicly, that was another thing that he said at that meeting. He regretted publicly that we, and he used we, meaning we as a people, the Hutu people, we made a mistake in 1959-60 of not finishing the job. Finishing the job meant finishing Tutsi. And we meant him and the rest of his people who are Tutsi. Now, what is key here is that Mugesera in 1959 was 6 years old. So hate speech can be transgenerational. This gentleman was 6 years old. In 1992, he was a young man speaking to a huge rally. And here he is saying that in 1959, he's speaking about that in 1992. He says in 1959, when he was 2 years, we made a mistake of not finishing them all. Now, that tells you many things about hate speech. When it has its own capability of regeneration from one generation to the next generation, as long as it is meant to do the harm that it wants to do. Hate speech makes hatred a common group priority, higher than all other priorities. People normally, groups of people, communities always have priorities. They want to do something, they want to reach across the boundaries, they want to unite with each other, they want to do things together. But hate speech has this thread of making hatred a common group priority that is higher than all these other priorities. During the genocide, what we saw was that saving Tutsi or not participating in killing them was considered and accepted widely as betrayal. Questioning the legitimacy of the killing was also betrayal. Hate speech in that form results in the hatred that a mother or a father could kill their children because they had suddenly become enemies by blood. In Rwanda, parents of families with mixed parentage, Hutu or Tutsi, or in the end, had very little choice but to kill their own children because they were either going to be Hutu or they were going to be Tutsi, depending on what was going on that day. So if it was a Tutsi father, he would be killed alongside with either some of the kids or all of the kids. If it was the Hutu mother, the same. If it was the Tutsi mother, the same thing would happen to her. In our world, hate speech is speech that eventually kills. And I want this to be, probably we should have a conversation around it in the end. In our world, hate speech is speech that we should understand that it eventually kills. Hate speech leads to nothing else. It cannot be confused with criticism, with opposition, with press freedom, with freedom of association. Hate speech is in its own category. In Rwanda, we know it, we experienced it. It's a cancer that kills. It is a cancer that won't be cured. Once it is started, it just won't be cured. We just need to prevent, we just need to stop it in its tracks, wherever it is. Media, the whole hate speech trail was carried by the media. A few newspapers, especially a newspaper called Kangura and just one radio, were able to set a whole country ablaze. And that Kangura and RTLM, if you Google them, you will find them on Google, and you'll find the leaders, and you'll find what they did. But I've been questioning myself around this thing. In 1994, between 1959 and 1994, Rwandans had very few media outlets. Rwanda had, about 2-3 newspapers at most, and I think Radio Rwanda plus that RTLM radio. Until 1994, there was no media expansion and explosion like we see today. But ladies and gentlemen, if 1 or 2 media outlets could set a country ablaze, how much damage would the 1 million uncontrolled media outlets today that we see today, how much damage would they inflict on a people? How much damage would they inflict on a community if hate speech, if fake news, if just lies were allowed to simply go on air the way whoever wants to put them out there wants. Post 1994 Rwanda, our context, our press freedom context, we had to make a few choices. One, we could have open-ended press freedom. It happens in some of the Western countries. We could have responsible press freedom because of our history. Germany does that. We chose a mix of those two. Let's be open, but let's have responsible freedom of the press. And our media has expanded nearly 150% since 1994. Social media has expanded equally, absolutely uncensored. But Rwandans, media inclusive, have learned the lesson of history. That is my conviction until now. Irresponsible media propagated hate speech and killed 1 million people in 100 days. RTLM was allowed to remain on air, and people continued to die because of RTLM, because of media freedom concerns, not just in Rwanda, but across the globe, because everybody in the world was hearing and following RTLM. But because we have learned the lessons of history, I think we have had to have a mindset shift on the media and how we deal with the media and why we do so. So today, media and journalism are deployed to their fullest maximum capacity, but to cause rule of law, to cause accountability, to fight corruption, to do political party activity, to advocate unity, advocate reconciliation because we've always tried to reconcile our communities since 1994, to fight poverty, to advocate integration, to criticize and oppose government where necessary. But hate speech, divisive speech, this speech that targets an ethnic community as an ethnic community or a religious community as such, there are limits to that kind of media. Media is in partnership with government, in partnership with the private, in partnership with faith-based organizations to do all things media, except hate speech, except divisive speech, except ethnic speech, the things that we died from, the things that killed us. So, ladies and gentlemen, moderator, permit me to stop there, and then I will be part of this until the end. I want to follow the conversation and then probably be part of the discussion at some point.